All right, welcome to episode 11 of the Rooster podcast. Had a great conversation with Christian Roy. Not sure if I'm saying that right, but he is an independent thinker. He is part of the Symbolic World group. He is an expert in Jacques Ellul and Bernard Charbonneau, who's a thinker that's not really well known. He is very well versed in McLuhan, and that's kind of what brought us together. Of course, symbolism as well. And we talked about McLuhan. We talked about symbolism. We talked about a lot of different things that I think you'll find very interesting. We talked about technology and instrumental thinking, technicity. We talked about Heidegger and the idea of the logos and the clearing and finding kind of the middle path. We talked about alien invasions through technology. We talked about human beings as the sex organs of the machines. We talked about the universe being machines for making God. And, these are a lot of different topics that we use to explore what's happening in the world today. So bear with the first maybe 5-10 minutes. There's a little bit of an audio, a little bit low quality with regards to audio, but after that it picks up and the conversation really picks up as well. So I hope you guys like it, and I give you guys Christian Roy. All right, welcome to the Rooster's Crow podcast. I'm here with Christian Roy. He is an independent thinker. He is someone that is in the Symbolic World group, and he's written some essays that I highly recommend for the Symbolic World. He is an Orthodox Christian. He studied Jacques Ellul for many years, and Bernard Charbonneau, if I say him right. And he's also interested in McLuhan, Marshall McLuhan, like I am as well. So I invite him on the podcast with kind of some general topics to discuss, but we're going to see and maybe attempt a little dialogos and allow whatever comes up to come up. So thank you for joining me, Christian.
Yes, thank you for having me. By the way, the name is Christian Roy.
Christian Roy. I've been practicing it, believe it or not. Christian Roy, because you said it with Roy. On Jonathan's podcast is he says your name, and I rewound it like 5 times, and I'm like, I just couldn't get it down. Christian Roy. Is that good? All right, I get there. And my background's Greek, so I think that actually hurts me a little bit trying to get that dialect, So yeah, Christian, right? Christian.
Well, you can go with Christian, but
yeah. I find you very interesting, and I find your ideas and your ability to think through a lot of obscure thinkers that I think their time is coming still. I find it very interesting. So I guess my first question is, can you give us a little bit about your background growing up and specifically coming of age intellectually, and what inspired you to chase these ideas down?
Well, there's not much to say about my growing up. I mean, just a suburban childhood of a total introspective, self-involved nerd, and who found a somewhat slightly more conducive environment in your university, McGill University, where I could delve more into my interest that crystallized there. Actually, I was actually basically there is a common thread that I've been always looking for ways to more meaningful kind of existence that the modern course of history affords. So looking at basically at counter-modern or anti-modern thought, and going down or looking down a number of dead ends until in my studies of European intellectual history, I came across thinkers known as French thinkers, mostly known as the nonconformists of the 1930s, and it's more specifically the personalists, some of among the who have had their impact, for instance, on some of the more progressive trends in the Roman Catholic Church. That didn't interest me very much. I thought there were more interesting figures that, for instance, had formulated the first critiques of technological society, for instance, and uh, the view to sort of reconstructing or building something new on the basis of taking the social, political, cultural, spiritual issues from the standpoint of the embodied person situated in an environment rather than it's a kind of generic kind of human being and a generic humanity. Just taking seriously particularity, starting with the particular person.
Mm-hmm.
So I, so that was one branch of it, and the other was the interest in the critique of technique. It's interesting because I've had to think about that even over the last hour, because I just got an email from someone who's doing a follow-up to a book on people who have been influenced by Ellul,
Mm-hmm.
and he's asking me if I'd like to contribute, and I'm thinking, well, yes, I did encounter Ellul, but it doesn't have that much lasting impact. You know, I found the Technological Society through a footnote in a book by George Grant, a Canadian thinker of technique,
Mm-hmm.
who remained more influential for me. But when I heard from a distinguished historian of my field of research in history as of those French personalists, etc., that there was that Ellul was in fact part of the personalist movement. Then I did proceed to investigate that seriously, and that's how I came across his friend and mentor Bernard Charbonneau, who had a much vaster influence on me, and from whom Ellul got the idea of sociological critique based on technique as a phenomenon. And in the meantime, yes, I had become interested on a kind of Canadian school of thinking about technique in a critical way, sometimes called a Toronto school, and that's identified with McLuhan. See, that also remained kind of superficial for many years. You know, I had the kind of I had sort of secondhand insights, funnily enough, from watching David Cronenberg's film Videodrome, which includes a character based on McLuhan, but one side and one misinterpretation of McLuhan as a kind of Catholic booster of technology, as a kind of substitute for church. You know, it's an understandable misunderstanding, but I was fascinated to discover early in this century that in fact his position was much more critical of these development than I thought, and much closer to mine, you know, tending to see technological society as more of a manifestation of the Antichrist, you know, a credible substitute for the mystical body that is church and that is Christ, you know, that kind of collective consciousness in an objective nervous system and collective psyche independent of us, that yet becomes the primary focus of our psychic, spiritual, and even physical life. You know, that I had been sort of always fascinating by that kind of perspective, but then I realized that it had been McLuhan's, you know, something like that had been in McLuhan all along. So I sort of took a deeper look at McLuhan ever since, especially since about the same time as my intellectual interests crystallized in the 1980s, I also became drawn to Christianity, which I, I had growing up largely rejected. Uh, uh, let's call it that. Let's say I had some kind of conversion experience, and that I realized that the Christianity I had thought I had understood is the one that had existed and continued to exist in the East, and that the problems that I had with what I thought was Christianity were problems with Western Christianity, which is, by the way, George Grant had the same kind of insight. He was fully aware, reading Philip Sherrard, an British Orthodox thinker you might know of, that Christ, the Christian church mutated into something else in its Western half from the moment that it acquired a distinct identity, like with the papacy and all that. So 1,000 years ago, that's what we usually call Western civilization, and it takes on characters that we now associate with Christianity, period, but are actually peculiar to that particular regional mutation of Christianity. So that understanding what changed there and how to interpret it, and well, critically, of course, from an Eastern point of view, but also how the new issues raised precisely by the promises and problems of Western Christianity can also be taken back to more traditional forms of Christianity and religion. I think even as a possibly world-destroying disaster, Western Christianity and civilization, it has to be not just rejected; it has to be integrated and transmuted. So, I think that's my current approach. And of course, a thinker like McLuhan is very vital in that. I've tried to develop, as you're probably aware, a kind of orthodox reading of McLuhan. Taking what is he possibly missing? What is he suspecting? And what points is he raising that from a larger or more more inner Christian perspective should be really taken into account if we also take seriously the civilizational mandate that comes with Christianity as a religion of incarnation. It cannot stop at our own bodies, however transfigured. It's the whole cosmos. That means we have to take the society such as it is, even the stray forms of Christianity, even the paganism, even the nihilism. All that has to be taken in stride and probed, and elements of that perhaps transmuted into something meaningful. So we can't just take refuge in a safe spiritual haven. And of course the personalist thinkers I'm interested in also were very big on that. That has its risk, because then you can be carried over into a kind of historicist account of incarnation, where you go with certain political currents that seem for you to point in the right direction. That can also be a mistake. So you have to also maintain an inner distance from whatever movement you happen to go along with or to initiate at any given moment. You cannot also just it cannot be turned into any kind of partisan enterprise, of that army versus that army. That's also wrong. It always comes down to a person facing other creatures, and that's what it comes down to, and that's where it leads back after encompassing the whole cosmos.
Yeah. Well said. Very well said. So too, and McLuhan has been really influential in my coming back to orthodoxy as well, and Rene Girard as well. Two very deep thinkers that both had conversions relatively late in their life. Girard a little bit later than McLuhan, so it made me started kind of, and reading the church fathers kind of had that effect as well. And I was just meeting with with a priest. I'm trying to return to the church. It's been 25 years, and I have a family and 3 kids now. We've never been to church other than for specific kind of once a year events. And I talked with the priest yesterday, and he came and visited our family. We're trying to kind of get back into that kind of a rhythm of attending the church and being part of the community there. And he said, there was a 2015 study that showed that there are now 40,000 plus denominations of Christianity. And it's just to speak to what you were talking about. It seems like it's the disintegration of the church. Do you think the metaphor of Christ had to die in order to be resurrected is the same for the church had to die in order for it to be resurrected? Does that make any sense?
Well, I wonder in what form it can be resurrected. See, if we define it by unity, that's where there are several, by visible unity, there's several problems with that. Either we will try to impose one particular church on the whole planet, which was pretty much the game plan for a couple of millennia, and now that seems counterproductive, really. Mm-hmm. And then there's the other pitfall of finding something that will act like Christianity or the church as a unifying force for mankind or the cosmos. And of course, and since electrical civilization, technological society are in fact unifying the planet, since they are in fact a concrete mystical body in which we all commune. Well, let's take that as church and say that this is actually the Holy Spirit, and since it makes us one, there has been trends in that direction, specifically within the Catholic Church, but not alone, to kind of go to that step, to be kind of naive about technology and media. And for a long time, I sort of put McLuhan in that camp, mm-hmm. because he makes these kinds of noises, and his own position is often unclear. He's sort of wavering between the two possibilities, between different possibilities. So there are these two approaches. I think a more fruitful approach at this point would be the kind outlined by Jonathan Pajot. There's just finding our symbolic bearings wherever we are, whatever resources or background we have. Finding our own access to logos, which will probably take the form of an established tradition, Christian or not, but I think all serious traditions and even all serious, I would go so far to say even serious secular approaches, that have some existential groundings, will point in the same direction, and that direction to me is more priority to me than the specific I hate this word, but denominational allegiance that I might happen to prefer or subscribe to personally, to restore a sense of symbolic order, of embodied symbolic order, starting from the very basics of our having a body and being in the world and having access to it through our body, and rebuilding from that. And that, of course, takes us close to the original personalist insight of my thinkers of the 1930s, how one could rebuild a civilization of spirit and of embodied spirit from such an insight, and that would, of course, find itself in a critical relation to the actually existing civilization around us. Just being authentically embodied and meaningfully embodied, which means having one's roots in a symbolic world, and drawing greater and greater consequences, both at the explicitly religious level and at a very concrete level. That would be, for me, would be is the way ahead to navigate our way through these. Actually, the two temptations that are outlined, kind of a confessional crusade on the one hand, or ecumenical communion and the electronic ecumene on the other.
Mm-hmm.
The two pitfalls we're constantly being tempted with at this moment.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I just kind of came to the insight of how Marshall McLuhan, he wrote a book, or I think it was Eric McLuhan, Theories of Communication. And it was kind of a pun because McLuhan says he doesn't have a theory of communication. And when he is exploring a media landscape, a media environment, he comes at it like a safecracker that, a yegg in a book, right? So he's palpating, how you get kind of the doctor palpates. So you're just probing
Exactly.
an environment. And I think this resonates kind of with the symbolism aspect. It's sort of like a protection against ideology and idolatry,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can make, and this is where the 10 commandments, this insight that's come to me recently of, the first commandment is don't worship any God, but the highest high, the mystery, the infinite.
Yeah.
If you worship anything else, it becomes idolatry. It becomes ideology eventually, and it turns into destruction. So it's this whole, balancing between these two poles that you just described here. Yeah. And I talked with Jonathan about how do we know symbolism isn't another ideology, and I think it goes back to the concrete embodied relationships that you have and the effects that implementing a symbolic way of thinking has on your relationships and your family and your community and within yourself. And I think it acts almost like a symbolic immune system against the pull of ideology, which comes in so many forms. You can make orthodoxy an ideology.
Absolutely. I mean, you can, worship the highest God, the most profound mystery, but in the wrong way, in a way that turns it into some sort of object or party against the world, against others, against and that it sets yourself up in a position to a profane other world. That's also that's a very open, easy pitfall. It's and it's because it's seductive because it's very satisfying. We can get to the sense of I'm really separate and I'm on the right side, etc. And I'm doing everything right, etc. But I think we're called to something less obvious than that. There's always mystery in we could call it in the margins. In what we're not immediately seeing. We should be ready to be surprised where encounters with reality will come from and what it might demand from us. We can't just rely on the system that gives us confidence. We should be with an open probing attitude. But it helps even with that openness to have very firm grounding, and that is the example we have in McLuhan. Where a rigorous Thomist, daily church-going guy who had absolutely no problem exploring every wildest aspect of popular or avant-garde culture, because he had a very firm transcendental grounding beyond doubt, and yet constantly subject to reassessment in its concrete application. He could confidently go into explore everything that presents itself in life, and even in this culture in such deep crisis, and see what could be salvaged and even salvific in that very problematic situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And he was, and the way that he explored these ideas by being rooted again in the ground, one of his main concepts is the idea that the media environment recedes into the background very quickly, and the forces that act on us that we experience through the content of the medium, right, are we are unaware of. So it's like we're swimming in a media landscape, the water that we can't see or feel. And he's kind of pointing to the water, and he talks about this idea of the figure ground relationship, and he even says that symbolism is this interplay between figure and ground, and he couches it in terms of left and right brain, because kind of he was talking when those terms were in vogue, and they're kind of coming back with Ian McGilchrist in terms of thinking like that. And I think of left brain thinking as quantity and right brain as quality, right? And we're pushing hard in terms of left brain, and McLuhan talks about the origins of this in the phonetic alphabet, and it took us away from acoustic space, which I wish he would have used a different word, maybe holistic. Like it took us away from holistic acoustic way of being into this visual way of understanding. And now with electric technology, we are shifting away from thousands of years of visual space very quickly and rapidly into acoustic space again, or I like to say kind of holistic space.
Not thousands, just barely 500 years, really.
Yeah. Well, the phonetic alphabet,
maybe a few centuries in antiquity and in Greece and Rome, and that's not much. It's just a tiny fragment of human experience over hundreds of thousands of years, and we now take that for the normal view of things. There had to be literal brainwashing over centuries to convince us of that, and now it's flipped. It conquered so totally that it totally flipped into something an even more immersive and overwhelming acoustic holistic experience that even tribal man ever experienced. That penetrates us even more deeply while using a very sense of individual agency. It uses certain of the trappings of the autonomous individual created by visual biased culture to integrate us into a blob of planetary reflexes. I think something that needs clarification in McLuhan that leaves me unsatisfied is well, he can be kind of simplistic about non-Western societies, lumping tribal cultures and scribal civilizations like China, India, whatever in the same bag, and then saying, "Oh, we're reverting to that." I wish we were, I wish we were. These cultures and civilizations, they have their wisdom, they have individual agency and thought, and we're now we appreciate them more now than we could before. They're not as they were probably still to McLuhan, the other to us. They feel much more natural to us, and that's part of an effect of our electric environment. That Eastern things and early medieval things are far more compelling to us spiritually to signify embodied spirituality than anything directly handed down from Renaissance, Reformation, Counter-Reformation culture or Enlightenment, and because these older forms of being, well, of course, we now have an organ to open ourselves to it. But of course, what are we doing this from? Because I think there is a difference, and here is the difficult step: is that these ancient acoustic cultures were genuinely embodied. Their acoustic environment was still shaped by the totality of the human sensorium in interplay on a human scale. Bodies in situation, it would be it in a forest or in a somewhat larger scale organic civilization. The basic unit was still the situated human body. That is no longer the case. There's a resemblance with the immersive environment of those cultures, but I think it makes a whole lot of difference. That it's no longer centered on the embodied person, but on this outered planetary brain, or if I dare call it that. It's more like a kind of jellyfish of nervous impulses, that we could call like the Chardin, the noosphere, a kind of materialized spiritual layer of atmosphere of this planet that has taken on a life of its own with its physical wiring, of course, to electrical networks, but which has its own dynamics, and it has become our actual subject. We're just the certain appendages that it needs to take virtual flesh. It just, I mean, it's a bit, like the Matrix. That there is still some need to take some actual energy from actual bodies, but it's to build a completely virtual world. Which has its mind of its own and its own agenda. And which uses our own impulses as individuals and as individuals in disarray, or even as in the, one of the amazing lines in the Matrix is that even people at church are part of the Matrix. So you can be a seamless part of the Matrix and be a very devout, church-going person, going through all the motions of tradition. You can still be part of the Matrix, and that's probably our default position. What are we doing now? we're thoughtful Christians on the Matrix. But I mean, at some level, we can sort of have a kind of critical distance and have some more or less vague notions of perhaps unplugging or at least playing with this environment in the spirit that is not the one that it dictates. But that's it. We are part. The subject is now the planetary brain, and it's no longer the local body that it was in pre-modern cultures, and that's a major difference that I think McLuhan, with his Western kind of assumptions, tends to overlook. He kind of panics. He has a reaction of panic and caricature to things non-Western, and that I kind of feel a bit shocking when I come across it, quite frankly, often.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
It's a useful distant analogy, but I think it's kind of disparaging and mostly misconstruing what was happening before literate Western man and outside of that, and that mostly provided for meaningful and wholesome life by and large, including in a whole swath of Christianity that never went the Western literate or print based route, or initially at least. Of course, now everyone is, all the Eastern cultures they have all flipped into the alphabetic environment, or even directly into the neo-acoustic environment of electricity. Some have had a few centuries or decades to adapt themselves to the Western alphabetic environment, and all of a sudden it became an electric environment. And possibly some have just made the jump straight from the tribal, communitarian, Easter, whatever you call it, environment, to the electronic kind of retrieval of it, without seeing the difference. So that, for instance, today you can have a kind of imperial Chinese state loyalty projected onto the kind of Orwellian experiment with technology that is going on in that communist capitalist regime. And this is what a takeaway from the laws of media that I was McLuhan's book, posthumous book that I was reading yesterday in preparation for this, is he kind of set up these. Of course, he has qualms about the kind of the restrictions of the the absorption of ground into figure by alphabetic culture under preconditions. But he's all equally wary of the well, what Wyndham Lewis called the well-adjusted man who's a robot, you know. And that's what shocked me yesterday. That he says that, you know, the Eastern ways of adjusting well, like is tantamount to robotism. Well, there's actually there's a grain of truth to that, and a serious grain of truth in that. Of course, you know, in Japan, they're comfortable and even eager to have robots that physically look like us, that can even play the same emotional roles. Whereas in the West, we're sort of queasy about that. And of course, they have shown, you know, a kind of a propensity for utter conformity that translates uncomfortably from a traditional society to the totalitarian one, without the gap of individual self-awareness that the West created, and that gap that was embodied in that problematic fiction of the Western individual is something that should be cherished now, in a sense. Interrogated, but not dismissed, you know, because we don't want to fall from the separate isolated individual in the standardized uniform space of Western print culture, to fall from that into a kind of reflexive reflexive and unreflective conformity to a collective body, you know, and that would be to a instant adjustment to a collective, even if it takes, you know, entertaining individual faces. We don't want that either. So what I learned what I take away from McLuhan's book is the importance of maintaining that gap between figure and ground, you know, between, let's call it, person and community, or person and collective, and I realize in the unsaid there that it has something to do, I guess, with what is distinctive about the Christian worldview, that it's neither individualistic, neither holistic in a way that just would encourage just dissolving into the whole. You know, the figure it emerges from the ground as a configuration that is in the nature of the ground. It is that the ground's nature is to configure, to produce configuration, and that, to me, that relates to the Trinitarian understanding of God. You know, it's not even in God there is distinction of a kind. You know, even in unity itself there is distinction. There is, even in the deepest mystery, something that calls for expression, and yet for dwelling in that particularized expression. You know, there was a phrase from a German expressionist poet, Gottfried Benn, that I love to remember to myself as my to guide me in my reflections early on. It just came back to me. He says, Gottfried Benn talks about die Form fordernde Gewalt des Nichts, the form demanding power of the nothing. You know, the mystery, the beyond being, is so profound that it demands expression. You know, and that's why the Logos is part of the mystery. It's not something added on, an accident, an illusion. It's fully in every particularized expression. The Logos is in every manifestation, has a unity in the Logos that connects it with the ultimate Logos that is uncreated. And that's where the Christian difference comes to play, and that can possibly heal the problems that its misunderstandings have caused. You know, that that it veered into a kind of individualized existence in uniform fields, and therefore there's the temptation to just fuse into a kind of undifferentiated wholeness that, of course, technology is too happy to provide. And I think just the thinking of connecting the thinking of the logos that is central to symbolism, according, for instance, to Jonathan Pajot, with the figure ground relation that is vital to McLuhan's mature thought, to the definitive expression of his thought. I think that is a very fruitful ground for reflection that I've been covered by preparing for this interview and reading finally McLuhan's Laws of Media. Required reading for all listeners. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's it. We commune in that.
Let me just
Holy writ.
let me read the first paragraph from the introduction. I'll give you an idea, right? So it says, one fundamental discovery upon which this essay rests is that each of man's artifacts is in fact a kind of word, a metaphor that translates experience from one form into another. Reminds me of the idea of his he's against the transportation theory of communication, right? We're just moving messages around. He's more of a make a change, communication in sense of making a change. And then quickly says, second fundamental discovery, it makes no difference whether one considers as artifacts or as media, things of tangible hardware, nature such as bowls and cups or forks and spoons, or tools and devices and engines, railways, spacecrafts, radios, computers, and so on, or things of a software nature such as theories of laws of science, philosophical systems, remedies, or even the diseases in medicine, forms or styles in painting or poetry or drama or music, and so on. So he's covering a lot of ground there with his four laws. And what you just expressed there, so much came up that I kind of don't know where to kind of begin. It seemed like it made me think when you were talking about this idea of, Heidegger's idea of standing reserve, and we've made the planet a standing reserve, right? Resources to be extracted, but those resources have ended up. The logical conclusion to that way of thinking and being is humans become the resource, right? You're using the resources of a river for power, the resources of a mountain for mining and metals and whatnot. Now the resources are our attention, and these algorithms are mining our attention. So it's like it's come full circle. And I think I just kind of play on that a little bit. There's this idea, like Gilles Deleuze calls this a singularity. He uses it in the sense when the flip always happens, right? When you push quantity hard enough, it has a qualitative shift, right? If you increase the temperature of liquid water to a certain extent, right, it becomes vapor, right? And the same thing, if you lower the intensity, it becomes ice. So we've been in this intensity of quantity that has been wrought upon us the last 500 years or so is now flipping into this qualitative shift. And it might be this creation of this grid, this brain, this global noosphere, like you were talking about. So here's what it kind of gets a little out there, right? So if there was an alien invasion of the planet, right, it's just an idea that I've been playing with, that it wouldn't look like ships in the air and big saucers that are flying over our cities. They would invade our imagination and our dreams and our intellect. And, this instrumental way of thinking, and two quotes that come to mind. One is, I think from Bergson. He says that the universe is a machine for building gods. And another quote that I've heard you reference, that man are the sex organs of the machines, right? So it's like, so
like
idea,
bees to flowers,
Yeah. And look, so what do we have around us?
Because the flower has its own agenda that the bees have no idea. The bees are just saying, oh, this is we'll just follow these colorful neons on the flower's petals, and we'll have all this neat food. Well, the plant is thinking, no, I have no interest in those bees. What I want is to spread my seed,
Yeah.
And technology will just want to spread its seed. It plays on our passion to spread itself,
So think about that.
In that sense, the sex organs are like the bees. That's the complete quote.
So think about that when you have, so right in front of me, I have two screens. I have a camera. I have my phone here, right? It's like, these are the aliens, right?
It's
They're
the full
popping,
bouquet,
they're,
it's a full bouquet of
yeah,
these alien
they're
flowers.
popping up everywhere fractally. And again, it recedes in the background, right?
Yeah,
And what do these, and McLuhan speaks of this, that when a child is watching television, he is being X-rayed, he sees, right? It's not reflecting light, it's emitting light, right? So we're
yeah,
being X-rayed. And now
yeah,
we've surrounded ourselves, especially with coronavirus now, that, everybody has screens around them, cameras all the time. We don't notice it and see it. But if you think of it in terms of an alien invasion, that they're building the infrastructure of their body, I think of Bitcoin and these technologies as more of a progression towards that. It's like they're literally manifesting in front of us and we don't see it, but some of us feel it,
yeah. Well,
um,
I think antenna of the race include science fiction films for the last 40 years, and there's so many movies have been made on this theme, and I think one of the classics is well, two related classics: the first remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and then The Thing by Carpenter.
mhm,
Whereas the terror there is that what is basically a blob can develop a perfect simulacra of yourself. You
mm,
know that the transition is kind of uncomfortable, but once you've made it, you don't care anymore. It doesn't matter. You can pass for a very particular person with all kinds of little quirks and maybe the personal ideas, but you're uh, uh, just a little bit of that choral, that collective entity. We see these things. We alter them as monster movies. Oh, things that might happen if there was an alien invasion. But I'm afraid it's already happened.
mhm,
These movies are usually documentaries. They
yeah,
portray what we've already become or what we're already becoming, and that we know it, but we can't formulate it. But we can frighten ourselves with these epic tales. And I guess that's how epic tales arose, in ancient societies. The fears of embodied being and being lost in nature take the form of all these monsters that might pop up out of the dark. But today, of course, it's aliens. It's not from the jungle. It's from another planet. It's not because the Earth has become, of course, our village lighted by the glow of our screens rather than by the fire around which we gather. So when it's what outside the glow of the screens that defines our village, that things can come out. That is from other planets. That we imagine the threats, from our own passions, our own institutions, whatever. We imagine them coming from outside. Uh, and we should always try to understand how these are really about ourselves. Interpret these things the way we now can fairy tales, since we're outside of that world from which they arose. But we should make that effort of being outside of our own advanced technological world, using in part, the wisdom of those fairy tales. If we take it seriously, they they
mhm,
they, they, they put us another standpoint from which we can also see our own world critically.
mhm,
That's the advantage of our time, that all times, all stages, and all variations of human existence exist simultaneously. So we do have critical resources. If we have this nimbleness to adopt these other identities, in whatever, vicarious capacity that are media, uh, technologies afford, which are in part real, but use that to turn it against the media reality itself.
yeah. There's another flip again, right?
Yeah,
It made me think of so Neil uh, Postman's book. At the end of his book, "Amusing Ourselves to
yeah,
Death,"
yeah,
the
yeah.
last chapter is the Huxleyan warning,
Mhm.
where he says, we're not moving towards Orwell so much, but towards Huxley.
Mhm.
And the idea of amusing ourselves to death, it just made me think of, we are building the zoo that's encapsulating us with our screens, and we're literally building our zoo where I'm using ourselves to death while the infrastructure is kind of taking over us, and we're laughing at the TV, and we're laughing at fighting on Twitter. And another kind of thing it brought up, McLuhan says in this, I want to share this like a minute of this video here before he says that violence stems from the loss of identity. Right? Violence stems from the loss of identity. How can we, and if we understand that, we can use it to hedge and kind of help control that. And we're seeing the loss of identity in many different ways across the globe, especially here in the United States. And what do we see? This high intensity increase of chaos, and chaos and technicity are kind of trying to one up each other, right? They're moving, and it's kind of engulfing us. And I think that it all stems from this unbridled technicity, this unbridled, I think of it as the logos that was straitjacketed by the phonetic alphabet, right? This real alive truth that was intuited by, even Plato and Socrates and the philosophers and the Hebrews and the Taoists, that was made flesh, right? Is in a living being. It's a living truth, and it's been not captured, but it's been constrained in certain ways where we're victim to this kind of way of thinking that we're not aware of. So I'm gonna, maybe this kind of lead up to maybe some ways kind of going forward. So I told you a little bit before this, there's this Marshall McLuhan 1977 lecture where I think he's speaking to this instrumental way of thinking of standing reserve. And he talks about here, he comments on Rodin painting or sculpting the thinker, the sculpture of the thinker. And he tells a joke about a Lufthansa flight. So I'm going to play it here, and then maybe we can react together here. I got it set up for us.
When Rodin was completing his statue of the thinker on a very hot afternoon, he finally turned to the model, the sitter, and said, "Okay, stupid, you can get down now." I feel somewhat sympathy with that man. I'm going to climb down. The captain of a big Lufthansa liner approaching Buenos Aires turned on the intercom and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have very bad news. We're out of gas. I'm going to ditch the plane right here." Now to the swimmers, I say, swim straight ahead. It's only 12 miles. Follow the sun. And to the non-swimmers, I say, thank you for flying Lufthansa.
I thought that was really great. And how he juxtaposed those. He says, Rodin tells the thinker, "Hey, get down, stupid. Like, stop thinking, stop the critique, the constant critique, the overthinking." Like, that's how the logismos, it's called in Greek, right? How this overthinking, and then hey, like the thing that we've built through this mechanism of overthinking, it is out of gas and it's going down. Yeah. So if you can swim, the future is not far, 12 miles, right? Buenos Aires, it's beautiful. Swim, it's only 12 miles, follow the sun. So I think, what do you think he's telling us here? How do we swim? What does that look like?
Well, first, that what we honor as the thinker is really a pose and a posture,
Yeah, wow, yeah.
It's not you thinking, it's someone's idea of someone thinking, using someone's a being that can realistically fill the role, and then becomes the icon of thinking, but that's not real thinking.
It's the making.
Real thinking is at ground level, not on the pedestal of thinking, and that's the difference between academic philosophy and actual embodied thinking. That is starkly illustrated in the difference between the thinking that is going on humble, improvised, flimsy amateur podcasts like this, and the kind of formal and choreographed and dramatized and self-important thinking that goes on in academia, and that no one really cares about.
Well, it's the idolatry of thinking. We've made thinking into an idol, and we worship the manifestations of that thinking as an idol. That's why you see in academia, which is crumbling at all levels, you see these departments and these thoughts, even peer review, has become compromised, right? Because you're idolizing the creations of your thinking, right? So again, you're falling into idolatry, and it's such a poignant thing to think of it like that. And we can stick with this topic, but like in terms of the 10 commandments, like, plug yourself to the infinite, right? Commandment number 1, right? Don't make idols. And then here's the source code to build civilization, right? Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't fornicate uncontrollably, don't be jealous of your neighbor's goods. I've always thought these as archaic. Why would God care if I slept with another man's wife? And why would he care if we lied? Well, it's not that he cares. He's saying that if you want to build civilization, it starts with the relationship that you have with the people around you. And just simple, follow these 10 rules. And if you do this, you can build bespoke civilizations beautifully anywhere that are embodied by the logos. So it's like, it's like the cultural DNA of rebooting civilization. It's like, get back to embodied existence and get back to caring for each other. And that's the bedrock. And what happens next, we'll see, right?
Yeah, and possibly the common common denominator could be put in the McLuhan terms of all of such commandments as basically mind the gap.
Mm-hmm.
It's
yeah.
Why is it that you have to love God and then your neighbor as yourself? In both cases, you have to be mindful of the gap. God and the neighbor are not extensions of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're somehow shown before them, and you're not to consider them something outside of you, and yet not an extension of you. You have to stay with the difference in oneness. And that's at every level of culture and civilization, is that gauging of that resonant interval of contiguity without sticking, and with and without impeding, without undue aggression, without merging, and without irredeemably excluding either. It's to live in the gap. Yeah, I'm in mind of connecting the dots before I forget. It's from those first lines of the laws of media that you say. The connection between his definition of that sense of the resonant interval of always maintaining the proper balance, which is always shifting, finding actually the proper balance at every instance between figure and ground. And realizing that it's modified by every action and thought and institution and idea and that you can have, that a human can have, every word also. And in that sense, because that's how media is everything that comes out of man for him, and it is, and he connects that to word, in the sense that it's well, the subtitle, isn't it, is, well, no, it's one of his early books, Understanding Media, was about the extensions of man. Well, that's what media are, the extensions of man, in the most general sense. In media are outerings of man, and therefore they are utterances, therefore they are words. You have to follow this chain of signifiers. Therefore, logos, the word, is also represented in technologies such as what Jonathan Pajot calls the garments of skin. They're also word. Maybe they're the outer layer of word, but they're still word. They're part of the continuum of words. You have to mind our words and our thoughts as well as our acts. That's why we have to be mindful of them, because that's where spirit is, in that interval, in that resonant interval between inside and outside, which is not a matter of just dissolving into the outside or rejecting the dangerous outside. It's inhabiting that interval, and that's the nature of logos. It's a configuration of breath, basically. A word is a configuration of breath. Configuration also means giving a figure to something emergent from ground, that is a ground that also consists in the constant emergence of figures.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be the topology that comes out of McLuhan's laws of media, and you can you could relate it to theology or cosmology at some level.
Yeah.
So all these things are connected. All these levels of experience from basically from metaphysics and Trinitarian theology to down to zippers or Euclid laws of geometry, and you name it. That's why there's hundreds of examples of tetrads in this book.
Mm-hmm.
But also, yeah, because so that we not also get the idea that this is just a Christian thing about Trinitarian theology. I'd like to. I think he misconstrues Heidegger, what Heidegger is trying to do in laws of media. I mean, he's talking as though Heidegger is presenting the standing reserve, the Gestell, as a kind of good thing, that we'll resolve our alienation once the act of figure merges into the potential of ground. If you take the whole view of the kinds of things Heidegger has been doing, you see that he's after something rather much like what McLuhan has been trying to put his finger on. That is the interval between figure and ground. I mean, after all, he's trying to recover that moment of pre-Socratic thought, whereas the sense of being, of openness, emerge out of the particular theologies of all the myths. Just the openness of raw being could be thought, not conceptually, but live toward and in. Before Plato's and his followers tended to clamp this down into a kind of general concept that is sort of put on a distinct metaphysical sphere, and that everything is related to that. That is that. Then we fall into the homogeneous, independent, alphabetic field.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes problematic, and the critique of metaphysics is partly the undoing of that independent fixed ground that is really a figure. That the problem is that it turns being into a figure.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore there's the straight line from that to technique.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to do that is in his later thinking is for Heidegger is to find other ways of thinking than technique, than the standing reserve, other relations to being, not having our relation to being foreclosed by the standing reserve of potential, but letting the open disclose itself. That's the idea of truth as aletheia, coming out of forgetfulness, letting the open take form. It comes back to that verse from Ben that I was quoting, the form demanding power of the no thing.
Mm-hmm.
Letting the wide open take form, and I think that could connect also to the Trinitarian insight. It doesn't have to take that form, but it's the sense that this apophatic wide openness to mystery also means an openness to its self-revelation in particular forms, in logos, in speech, therefore in poetry as creation, poiesis, and of course also in dwelling in space as a kind of resonant space, as opposed to technology as just a machine à habiter, as Le Corbusier said, the modernist architect, dwelling machines. It's not that you make cubes of abstract space and with different technical functions, and including living as one of the technical functions. It's not that. You just leave space open, even if it can be sort of framed but not end-framed, but just pointed to some resonance that it dwells within the opening from above, and also from what welcomes it below on earth. So yeah. I think that there's that quest, I think, in Heidegger, that McLuhan overlooks in sort of with a partial reading that shoves it with his caricature of Eastern and tribal and all that, So there's we have to correlate these insights from different approaches. A post-metaphysical philosophical approach like Heidegger's, and a theologically informed but approach like McLuhan, although he's not claiming to be a theologian, but of course he's informed by certain assumptions of Christian theology, of course. And it's important to maintain these distinctions, but to me, from whatever, and of course you could find, I guarantee you can find very similar thing in the very Eastern traditions that he caricatures also, it's that sense of logos emerging from the open, from the unbounded, form as an expression of what is beyond form, created as the expression and dwelling of the uncreated, and which means the full chain of analogies as resonances between the ultimate logos that is at one with the divine breath and the divine mystery, and with every the most flimsiest garment of skin, all these outerings, all expressions, all outerings, all utterances, all are words and can be treated and recovered actually as logos. If we see them in the light of logos with a capital A, there is a possibility of some kind of transfiguring even the most modest, or even possibly the most problematic particular logos.
Yeah, that's a lot came up there. It's like it's like an unconcealment. So truth as aletheia, lithi means hidden. So the unconcealment, it happens in the clearing.
Yeah.
The clearing is the interval. It's the space to dwell in order for the logos to manifest. It reminds me of Christ as man's dispensation was to be appropriate mediator of heaven and earth.
Yeah.
Right? Christ came to show us the right relationship with unity and multiplicity. Right? The appropriate relationship between the multiplication of unity and the unification of the multiple done with the logos and with the appropriate relationship to the interval is kind of what our dispensation was. And that would have been our inheritance should we have eaten from the tree of life, which was our inheritance as well. But we ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil too early. We weren't spiritually mature enough to deal with to deal with the world. So we're like children trying to deal with the world where we need to become adults, spiritually adults, in order for us to mediate heaven and earth appropriately. That's kind of what came up with me.
And we do that by following how the heaven and its word showed us the way. The way of the logos is self-emptying.
Kenosis.
The logos itself, by being an expression, an outering, is in a sense a self-emptying of the empty. That creates full, because what is beyond everything is so beyond everything that it withdraws, allows some sort of otherness and form to emerge, and the truth of that form is that it also is a self-emptying, that's the key. The self-emptying that gives rise to forms out of the ground is also the self-emptying that allows the figures, the forms, the beings to stand in proper relation to each other in that common space that they inhabit, that is held together in the open by the logos. It reverberates at absolutely every level, from that self-emptying word to every self-emptying expression.
I think the term void that's used a lot in the psychoanalysis, the Lacanian idea, the Zizek'in idea of the void that is the subject, right? It's a void because we think of it as a negation. And I don't know if we have a lot of time to go into it, but the dialectic, which was not created, but in the way that Hegel formed it, was thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? The thesis, the antithesis is a negation, right? Which then is resolved in the antithesis. And there's this idea that Hegel was resentful of a son that he had because his son was holding him back from his kind of teaching profession, right? So he sees the second part of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? The Son is an expression of the Father. In Hegel, the Son, the antithesis, is a negation of the Father.
Hindrance. Yeah, yeah.
Right. So that negation is, I think, where the idea of the subjective void comes from, right? And this idea of we need to flip that, right? So the negation is not, and the whole idea is the negation of the negation is the resolution into the new form, the new understanding that wasn't present in the thesis. So I think we need a short circuit the idea of the antithesis and make it the expression of the infinite, right? The finite is an expression of the infinite, right? The Son is an expression of the Father, not a negation of the Father.
Yeah. And that in a sense that the negative is not something that comes after a something, but that the undescribable is there first, if anything can be said, and that out of the depths of this non-affirmation, somehow that wide openness takes the form of a secondary openness, which is expression, you know.
Yeah.
So we need to clear our head of all that Western metaphysics is still embedded in Hegel and many of his critiques, you know. Yeah. So I have more of an Eastern head and not just an Orthodox head, more of a perhaps something of a Taoist or Buddhist head when I think of the void. You know, it's not at all the void of active negativity of Hegel, whatever. You know, that doesn't come to my mind at all. It's an experiential, in a sense, openness. I think Heidegger is closer to the mark there. You know, it's not for nothing that he had such a deep dialogue with Japanese and Chinese thinkers. You know, there's real common ground there.
Interesting you say that. My path back to orthodoxy came through Taoism. I was practicing Qigong, meditation very heavily, visualization, and really resonated for many years with Taoism. And I practiced traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, dealing with the Wu Xing, which is the 5, earth, metal, water, fire, right? I was so drawn to it. And I found I thought that was the kind of the pinnacle. And then I found the church fathers and I'm like, oh, wow, they were really bringing it to reality. So I really resonated with Taoism, right? The Tao being the Tao that can be spoken is not the Tao in terms of the Tao Te Ching. I think there's a lot of resonances with Eastern Orthodoxy and Taoism, like there was with Heidegger's relationship with it. But I think that's a topic that could go on for quite a while.
It's already been covered in parts. You're probably familiar with that book, aren't you?
Oh yes, that was the first book I read. Well, the reason I started my YouTube channel a year ago now was I was reading that book and I read that entire book from cover to cover as my first 25 videos. I don't know why. I'm like, people need to hear this. And I just started reading on camera. And that was about a year ago this month. And the craziest experience here, and I'll let you go here. We've gone for an hour and a half. I went to this store that I go to, and I usually see the guy there that works there. And he wasn't there that day. And it was his nephew was there. I never met him before, but I knew he was into Orthodoxy. And long story short, he watched the video of Seraphim Rose, of Father Damascene's Christ the Eternal Tao before I got in there. Like he's never met before. He's like, I was just watching that because I'm doing a video. So the craziest thing, he's that little, the Holy Spirit acts in mysterious ways. I'll kind of last quick question, just kind of have a little fun here. So what is in the water in Canada, right? So these thinkers, what do they have in mind? Jordan Peterson, Camelia Paglia, J.P. Marceau, John Vervaeke, Christian Roy, Jonathan Peugeot, Gad Sad. I can go on. This new rapper, Tom McDonald, I don't know if you're familiar with him. McLuhan talks about how, we're either close enough to America to look over the fence like a neighbor, but not in it. So you can have this kind of this separation.
I don't know all of these people, but that's what I was going to point you. That Canada is a counter environment to to America as basically it is the environment of technological society. So therefore, to understand technological society, you have to be Canadian, basically, because you're not stuck in the old world of Europe, and you're not part of the new world of America.
You're in the interval.
You're part of it, but not neutral. But there's just a bit of distance, you know. So it's like McLuhan said, you know, and I've often said, you know, to you. You know, we don't know who discovered water. We're pretty sure it wasn't a fish.
Right.
So we're like the opposite of a fish out of water. We're the non-fish in the American water. That's what Canada is. We're the scuba divers, you know, who pass for fish. You know, the fish don't even notice that there is something other than the fish swimming around them. You know, unbeknownst to them. But the fish, you know, the non-fish, the intruder, you know, they don't want to be noticed by the fish, so that do not be eaten by them either. You know, they just want to pass for fish, you know, and not be bothered too much. It's okay that they don't realize that there's a non-fish in the tank, but you know, they take notes. And they make interesting reports when they get back to their own element, you know. And that's what McLuhan has done, and that's what I guess all us Canadians are doing.
And Americans like me are noticing you guys. We don't want to eat you. We want to know what your notes say, you know. Oh man. So you know, thanks for joining me here. We're gone an hour and a half. I appreciate you, and I'd like to do this again. There's so much, man. When you bring up topics that just bring so many threads that we could explore. So maybe we'll do this again.
Well, actually, I want to plug in a possible follow-up or something, you know, because actually I'm sort of sitting down for a project that I've had to publish, you know, to translate an unpublished book by Bernard Charbonneau, unpublished even in French, his book on mediatized society. So it's not Ellul who wrote the book on media. You know, if you like technological society, I would say as a publicist, you're going to love Mediatized Society. It's a short book, 100 pages, and I have this plan of translating it in installments, short chapter installments, through a Patreon page. You know. So, and of course, using all my networks where there is already some interest in Charbonneau, to help me put that out, because it's not even available in French, but I happen to have the manuscript from 1985. So I'll let you know when that begins to take shape. Maybe we can begin to have a conversation around that will, you know, go that will take this conversation in new directions, and maybe closer to the original subject, which I thought was media, but from another angle than McLuhan's. Mediatized Society. So watch for it, and I hope you can put up a link there whenever I'm ready with that to launch this project.
Yeah, I'm going to put a link to your work on the symbolic world, a couple of your blog posts there. Anywhere else where we can find you?
Yeah.
Anywhere
Google
else?
me, you know, with a relevant word, you'll probably find something. Also, I have an academia.edu page. You know, I diss on academia, but that's my only. It's by pretending to be an academic that I can put a few things out there. But fortunately, through people like you, freelance thinkers, fellow freelance thinkers, I may reach my real intended audience.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thanks for swimming in the water with me. Appreciate it.
It was lots of fun. Yes.
Thank you. All right. We'll talk soon. Thanks, Christian.